Good afternoon, everyone. My name is David Ellwood. I'm the Dean here at the Harvard Kennedy School. Thank you for being with us here in the John F. Kennedy Jr. Forum. It's my particular pleasure to welcome our very special guest, His Excellency John Dramani Mahama, as our speaker this evening. He's the President of the Republic of Ghana, and he will speak on economic governance in uncharted waters. Welcome, Mr. President.
Thank you.
It's really quite an honor having you here because you've been such an extraordinary leader, and it's actually hard to imagine a more important topic than the one you have. Before I turn to the formal introduction, though, I would like to acknowledge the many distinguished guests in our audience. We have a number of ambassadors, senior ministers, counselors, members of the government. Please forgive me for not having the opportunity to call you out each by name, but please join me in welcoming these very august guests. I do especially want to thank the Institute of Politics for all they do and the Office of University Marshal for making this all possible. Now, as virtually everyone in this audience, I suspect, knows, Ghana is a beautiful country on the west coast of Africa and is one of the most thriving democracies and economies in the continent. It encompasses plains, low hills, rivers, and Lake Volta, the world's largest artificial lake. Its cities present a varied appearance and buildings of modern, colonial, and traditional African architecture. It's a nation of many languages. Indeed, there are over 70 different ethnic groups, each with their own distinct language. With a population of approximately 25 million people, Ghana has perhaps the most enduring democratic experiment. It started in 1992. Many now look to it as a model. It has an incredible history of strength and resilience, and it was the first sub-Saharan African country to achieve independence from colonial rule. And its cultural diversity, friendly people, and proverbial hospitality, coupled with the geographic accessibility and active diaspora, have positioned it to meet the opportunities and challenges its peoples face. It has a rich and diverse resource base with primary manufacturing and exploration of digital technology goods, combined with automotive and ship construction, and exportation, as well as exportation of diverse and rich resources, but especially cocoa. And let me just say on a more personal note, my daughter had the great privilege of working in Ghana during the summer of 2011, working on agricultural issues. She absolutely fell in love with the country, and she really loved the work. Our distinguished guest tonight has a vibrant career rich in service and learning. He received his BA at the University of Ghana and furthered his education by doing postgraduate studies in communication at the University of Ghana in the School of Communication Studies. He then went on to Moscow for further education. When he returned in 1991, he became the Information, Culture, and Research Officer at the Embassy of Japan in Accra. After working at the Embassy of Japan for a few years, he moved on to become the International Relations, Sponsorship, Communications, and Grant Manager at the Ghana Office of PLAN, P-L-A-N, an international development charity that has committed itself to alleviating child poverty and improving the lives of children over the world. He then ran as a candidate for the Member of Parliament in 1996 and won on the ticket of the NDC. During the NDC administration of 96 to 2000, he was also a key member of the economic management team and played a very critical role in the publicity committee for the reintroduction of the value-added tax. He was reelected to Parliament 2 more times in 2000 and 2004. 2003, became a member of the Pan-African Parliament, serving as chairperson of the West African Caucus until 2011. In 2008, he was elected vice president along with President John Adam Atta Mills, and their terms began in 2009. As vice president, he also served as the chairman of the National Economic Management Team, the Armed Forces Council, and the Decentralization and Implementation Committee, and the Peace Council in Ghana. Tragically, as everyone knows, the iconic President Mills died of illness unexpectedly in 2012. Mahama called it the saddest day in our nation's history and stated that he had lost a father, a friend, a mentor, and a senior colleague. He served out the remaining 5 months of Mills' original term and was popularly elected to the office in December 2012. He laid out a bold agenda for education, health, social policy, economic reforms, infrastructure improvements, and greater transparency. And indeed, Ghana has had very strong growth in the last 6 years, making it among the world's fastest growing economies. The World Bank reported a growth of 7.1% in 2013, for example. Still, there are some worrying signs: a high fiscal deficit, inflation running above 10%, and expected slowdowns in growth in 2014. And although Ghana has not registered a single case of Ebola, the country has experienced its repercussions as tourists and potential visitors postpone their visits. Yet, illustrating the leadership of Ghana, the country will serve as a hub for the international push for handling the Ebola crisis. It's one of many examples where President Mahama has been a powerful voice in Africa and the world. Mahama has committed himself to fulfilling the vision of creating a better Ghana by focusing on jobs, stability, and development. He is also an avid reader, an author, and a historian. He considers the combination of the study of history, communications, and social psychology as having had a tremendous impact in shaping his views, his thoughts, his understanding, and have contributed significantly to making him the person he is today. Over the course of his career, he's written for several newspapers and other publications, and recently published his first book entitled My First Coup d'etat and Other Stories from the Lost Decades of Africa. He's very good at titles. He's the winner of a great many honors and awards. It is our great honor to welcome the President of Ghana. Welcome, sir. Welcome to the Harnett case.
Thank you very much. Just three quick things before we get started. I've not been involved in a coup d'etat. I get asked that question every day because of the title of my book. Two, it's difficult to stop presidents when we get started, so just nudge me if I go on a bit too long. And three, being a historian, I've written my presentation in a narrative form, and so it's like a story. And so if you expected a technical paper, you're going to be disappointed. So with those three things out of the way, we can start. Good afternoon, Professor David Ellwood, Dean of the Harvard Kennedy School of Government and the Institute of Politics here at the Kennedy School, for inviting me to speak today. It is a privilege and an honor for me to be here with you today, and more specifically for me to speak with you on the topic of economic governance in uncharted waters as part of the John F. Kennedy Forum. In 1960, when then Senator John F. Kennedy addressed the crowd before him and the nation at large to accept his political party's nomination of him as their candidate for the upcoming presidential election, he said, and I quote, "We stand today on the edge of a new frontier," quotations closed. Kennedy then went on to describe that frontier. He said it was, and I quote again, "the frontier of unknown opportunities and perils, the frontier of unfulfilled hopes and unfilled threats. Beyond that frontier," Kennedy declared, "are uncharted areas of science and space, unsolved problems of peace and war, unconquered problems of ignorance and prejudice, and unanswered questions of poverty and surplus." That new frontier to which Kennedy was referring was the decade of the 1960s. But those words he used then could just as easily describe the challenges and the opportunities that we are facing now in this current era. The nation that John F. Kennedy was addressing, the nation standing at the edge of the new frontier, was the United States of America. And yet I, the President of the Republic of Ghana, a nation that is far away from here across the Atlantic Ocean, could just as easily address my own nation and use those same words to describe the new frontier upon whose edge Ghana stands today. It is indeed a frontier of unknown opportunities and perils. It is a frontier of uncharted areas of science and space. It is also a frontier of unanswered questions of poverty and surplus. Even though the same words are applicable, even though the description is quite fitting, the new frontier of which Kennedy spoke, the new frontier that was facing the United States back then, is in no way identical to the new frontier of today, and certainly not the one that is currently facing my country, Ghana. In 1960, Ghana had only been a sovereign nation for 3 years. In 1957, we became the first sub-Saharan African nation to win independence from colonial domination. That victory seemed to spark a chain reaction throughout the continent, with nation after nation also gaining independence from colonial rule. That decade was dominated by names like Jomo Kenyatta, Patrice Lumumba, Sylvanus Olympio, Kenneth Kaunda, Nnamdi Azikiwe, and of course, our own Kwame Nkrumah. These were the freedom fighters, the visionaries, the men who led their country into liberation from colonial rule. In 1960, not long after then Senator Kennedy delivered his address on the new frontier that he had envisaged, Dr. Kwame Nkrumah, Ghana's founding father and its first president, delivered a speech to the United Nations. In it, he described the new frontier that he envisaged not only for Africa, but for the world. In my view, Dr. Nkrumah said, and I quote, "We're passing through another scientific and industrial revolution, which should make unnecessary the division of the world into developed and less developed areas. We must therefore avoid economic thinking based on the conditions of the past. Above all, we must avoid an attitude of mind which applies in an area of abundance the economic theories worked out to serve an age of scarcity." Quotations closed. Those were heady times. The victory of sovereignty gave birth to idealistic prospects and ambitious plans. These were new countries, and these men, individuals like Jomo Kenyatta, Patrice Lumumba, Olympio, Kaunda, Azikiwe, and Nkrumah, were new to governance. They were freedom fighters, visionaries, leaders who now found themselves in the uncharted waters of governing their fledgling democracies. It didn't take long for that idealism and ambition to give way to corruption and coup d'etats. It didn't take long for nearly every new democracy in Africa to turn into a dictatorship, and for the continent as a whole to be plunged into poverty and economic crisis. After Dr. Nkrumah was overthrown in a coup d'etat in 1966, Ghana was subjected to a series of coup d'etats, one of which took place in 1972 and brought into power Colonel Ignatius Kutu Achampong, Colonel Ike Achampong for short. At the time Colonel Achampong took power as a military head of state, Ghana's population was a little more than 9 million people, and the country's debt was $577.88 million. One of the first policies that Colonel Achampong made was regarding the question of the high national debt and what to do about it. Yentua, he said. The translation of this statement from the native Akan language into English means, "We won't pay." It was as simple as that. We won't pay. But Colonel Achampong had a plan for Ghana. He believed that the country should not have to rely at all on foreign assistance, and that we should be self-sufficient. So Achampong implemented a program called Operation Feed Yourself. He banned the importation of rice and requested that the Bank of Ghana issue direct commodity loans to local rice farmers and local rice mills so that they could purchase rice from the local farmers. And it just so happened that my father, E.A. Mahama, owned a rice mill and was also a rice farmer. He had been a politician for many years. He had indeed served as a Minister of State in the government of Dr. Kwame Nkrumah. And so during the overthrow of Nkrumah, that is the coup d'etat, my father was held in detention and kept there for over a year. After his release, my dad decided to quit politics and literally just mind his own business. He returned to the northern part of the country where we come from and bought some land on which he intended to live a relatively quiet life as a rice farmer and look after his family. Colonel Acheampong's Operation Feed Yourself program was widely successful, so much so that he officially referred to the northern region, where there were several rice mills, including my father's, as the granary of Ghana. Ghana was producing so much rice that we're even able to begin exporting some of it overland to countries like Mali and Burkina Faso, which was known as Upper Volta at the time. It was renamed Burkina Faso in 1984. It wasn't just rice that was being locally produced in abundance. It was also maize, tomatoes, yams, cassava, and so many other food products. Within a short period of time, Ghana's entire agricultural industry had been completely revitalized. Indeed, most people even started growing herbs and vegetables in their backyards. Operation Feed Yourself was not Colonel Acheampong's only successful project. There was also Operation Keep Right, which switched Ghana, a former British colony, from driving on the left side of the road to driving on the right side of the road, like the rest of the world. And this took place in 1974. And for Ghanaians who lived at the time, they will recognize the popular jingle that was used for this operation as Pipin, pin, pin, and yifa, na, nyen. Okay, good. Colonel Acheampong also launched the National Reconstruction Program, which was aimed at employment promotion and the teaching of practical and vocational skills. Initially, my father was a staunch supporter of democracy and was therefore not a fan of Colonel Acheampong, because in his mind, Acheampong was a coup maker. But after witnessing the transformation that was taking place in the country, especially the return of citizens' morale and national pride, even my dad could not deny the fact that technically, despite the fact that Acheampong was a dictator, Acheampong had a vision and was leading the country in a positive direction. My dad felt that if Colonel Acheampong maintained his programs and then returned the country back to democratic rule, he might very well be remembered as one of the greatest leaders Ghana had ever seen. My father was so convinced of this that he sat down and wrote Colonel Acheampong a letter of praise. In that letter, my father, a seasoned politician, also offered Acheampong a bit of advice. He said, and I quote, "Learn to leave when the applause is the loudest." That was the advice he gave to a soldier in government. That was perhaps not the wisest thing to do. Learn to leave while the applause is the loudest. Shortly after receiving the letter, Colonel Acheampong, who had actually at this time just given himself a promotion in rank from colonel to general, dispatched several military men to find, collect, and detain my father. Dad was taken to a nearby barracks where for over a period of several days, he was held and interrogated about his intentions. What exactly did he imply when he wrote to the general and told him to leave when the applause is the loudest? You see, what my father failed to realize is that the problem with coming into power by force is that it breeds a very specific type of paranoia. And many military leaders find it difficult to trust anyone because they believe, and rightly so, that just as they were able to take power, somebody else might come along and take that power from them. Couple that with the paranoia, with the often diagnosable narcissistic personality disorder that many African dictators of the time suffered, and you have the perfect breeding ground for anything from psychopathic violence to sociopathic self-aggrandizement. And I'll give you 3 examples. Several years after his 1965 coup in the Democratic Republic of Congo, Joseph Desire Mobutu fixed his image on the country's postage stamps and currency and changed his name to Mobutu Sese Seko Nkunku Ngbendu Wazabanga, which translates to the all-powerful warrior who, because of his endurance and inflexible will to win, will go from conquest to conquest, leaving fire in his wake. There's another. In 1969, after the coup in Libya, Colonel Muammar al-Gaddafi declared that he was the leader of the Arab leaders, the King of Kings of Africa, the Imam of all Muslims. He rejected the title of head of state or president, and instead he adopted the official title, Brother Leader, Guide of the 1st of September Great Revolution of the Socialist People's Libyan Arab Jamahiriya. And the third one is my favorite. In 1971, after the coup in Uganda, then Major General Idi Amin Dada promoted himself to Field Marshal. He then assumed the title, His Excellency, President for Life, Field Marshal Alhaji Dr. Idi Amin Dada. He then started bestowing upon himself various decorations and end titles, such as CBE, Conqueror of the British Empire. He also had VC, Victoria Cross, and he had DSO, Distinguished Service Order, and he had MC, Military Cross. By the end of his tenure, his complete self-giving title had become, and I quote, His Excellency, President for Life, Field Marshal Alhaji Dr. Idi Amin Dada, VC, DSO, MC, Lord of all the beasts of the earth and fishes of the sea, and conqueror of the British Empire in Africa in general and Uganda in particular. My father, who had been released from his brief detention, quickly returned to his rice farming and the practice of minding his own business. And as General Ike Achampon's own paranoia would have had him predict, he was eventually overthrown in a coup d'etat. I tell this story because it is difficult to fully comprehend where we are today as a nation without having some idea of where we have been. Like most things and people, we are best understood when things are taken in context. When things are not considered in context, logical reasoning is lost, and practical explanations begin to feel like a string of pathetic excuses. After General Achampong was overthrown, there were more coups d'etats. There were a couple of attempts to return the country to democracy, but these were short-lived and they ultimately failed. But Ghana was not alone in our failures. The political instability and mass corruption that was taking place in most African countries led the continent into a period that is often referred to as the lost decades. During that period of time, the majority of countries in Africa experienced a brain drain, a mass exodus of artists, intellectuals, academics, skilled professionals, and politicians who went into voluntary or forced exile. Africa collectively also experienced extremely poor economic performance. A number of countries even had zero economic growth. During that time, Ghana's economy was actually shrinking. In the mid-1980s, under the leadership of our last military head of state, Flight Lieutenant Jerry John Rawlings, Ghana sought assistance from the International Monetary Fund in order to launch what we called an economic recovery program. The IMF and the World Bank were both created in July 1944 during a conference that was held in Bretton Woods, New Hampshire. The goal of that conference was to devise ways in which to assist individual member nations with their economic growth and development so as to ensure a stable and prosperous global economy. The IMF's stated mandate is to promote international monetary cooperation and provide policy advice and technical assistance to help countries build and maintain strong economies. The fund also makes loans and helps countries design policy programs to solve balance of payment problems when sufficient financing on affordable terms cannot be obtained to meet their net international payments. But the IMF's assistance came with conditions. Among them was the institution of various structural adjustment measures that required governments to cut public spending by, among other things, eliminating subsidies for food, agriculture, medical care, and education, and also privatizing state enterprises and raising interest rates. The structural adjustment programs really proved to be a one-size-fits-all solution. They did not take into consideration each country's specific needs, nor were they concerned with the issue of long-term sustainability after the achievement of short-term fiscal stability. Because of this, the IMF had many critics, and none of them harsher than Kenneth Kaunda, Zambia's first president, who likened the institution, that is the IMF, to a mad doctor who prescribed the same medication for all patients regardless of their illness. And actually what Kaunda said, and I'll quote it, it's a classic quotation, and in quotation marks, the IMF doesn't care whether you're suffering from malaria, a cold, or a broken leg, Kaunda said. It will always give you quinine. For those of you who know quinine, it's the bitterest medicine you can ever find on earth. The critics, including Kaunda, were not altogether wrong. In 2002, there was a study released by the Structural Adjustment Participatory Review International Network, which was prepared in collaboration with the World Bank and various other partners. The study found that the IMF structural adjustment programs had been expanding poverty, inequality, and insecurity around the world. And then they quote here, they have torn at the heart of economies and social fabric. This is a quotation from that study. For some countries, the effects of the structural adjustment programs were immediate and fairly catastrophic. For Ghana, they were like tiny fissures, the effect of which would not be felt for a few decades to come. With assistance from the IMF and then also the World Bank from 1984 to 1988, Ghana's economy experienced steady growth for the first time since the latter part of the 1970s. Our IMF assistance occurred in three separate stages, the first of which began with the Standby Arrangement, or SBA, of 1983. The primary goal of that stage was to revive unproductive sectors and curb inflation through increased fiscal and monetary discipline. The second stage, which began in 1987 and stretched through to 1990, had the goal of economic restructuring and social service renewal. The final stage began in 1998 and took on the task of macroeconomic stability and financial transparency. Not surprisingly, these movements towards economic stability ran parallel to the movement the country was also making towards political stability. In 1992, Ghana was fully returned to democracy and constitutional governance. Since then, we have had 6 successful elections and peaceful transfers of power. That consistency ensured an uninterrupted flow of services and policies. It also allowed for the strengthening of institutions and the steady weeding out of corruption. In 2002, Ghana was granted debt relief through the Highly Indebted Poor Country Initiative, HIPIC, which is a joint program of the IMF and the World Bank's International Development Association. Under the initiative, the total debt relief from all of Ghana's creditors amounted to some $3.5 billion in nominal terms. Flash forward 10 years to 2012. That is 10 years of political stability, 10 years of fiscal responsibility, 10 years of uninterrupted social intervention programs, 10 years of investor confidence, and perhaps most telling of Ghana's prospects, 10 years of return and repatriation by citizens whose departure, whether forced or by free will, contributed to the brain drain, and so we started to enjoy some brain gain, return of some of these people who had left. Fast forward 10 years to 2012, and Ghana had been named one of the top 5 fastest growing economies in the world. This is the part where the past imposes itself on the present. The part where you see the beauty and brightness of your destination, but you cannot move forward until you have fixed the problems that for years have been ignored, delayed, or only half addressed. It is also the part when I get elected as president and inherit the task of doing these things, the task of it falls squarely on my shoulders. The instability in the global markets have a direct bearing on Ghana's budget, and hence our ability to finance our development. The ongoing global economic downturn has started exposing the weakness in our foundation, in our economic foundation. What's more, we started to not only see but also feel the effects of those tiny fissures I talked about that were created long ago when the conditions of outside assistance were placed on us. Once Ghana had numerous state enterprises, but as per the requirements of the Structural Adjustment Program, over 130 of them, including some like companies in the mining sector that were a significant source of revenue, had to be privatized. Once Ghana's agricultural industry was thriving to the point that we had started, as I said in the earlier expose, to export our own rice. But as required, the government stopped subsidizing farmers and opened the markets to international competition. Ironically, developed countries like the United States of America continued at the time to subsidize their farmers. And so currently, US rice imports are a staple in Ghana. Actually, the majority of the staples in Ghana are imported. We import frozen fish. We import frozen poultry. We import groundnut oil. We import, you say peanut oil? Okay, sorry. That's why you didn't understand what I meant when I said groundnut oil. We import peanut oil. We import soya bean oil. And so many other products that we are capable of producing. And it's costing us dearly. In 2013 alone, it cost us $467.2 million to import rice. It cost us $217.2 million to import sugar. It cost us $234.4 million to import vegetable cooking oil. And this is a country in the tropics that has a comparative advantage to produce all these products. But the cost is not just financial. It is also costing us in the heightened morale, pride, confidence, and sense of national unity that comes from being self-sufficient. And those things are also equally vital to nation building and development. When people ask of the early period of Achampong's reign and the progress that was made under the Operation Feed Yourself, for instance, they do so with a sense of nostalgia and the yearning to seem to be defined more by a lost sense of identity than by anything else, because those were not particularly the best of times. The economic policy of Yentua, or we won't pay, is not only impractical, but it's irresponsible. Yet, our economic planning and policies that do not include or encourage self-reliance, and are they any more practical or responsible? These are the uncharted waters in which Ghana currently finds herself. And at times, it feels a lot like an estuary, where the meeting of two distinct bodies, the sea and the river, is also the threshold of untold and unlimited possibilities and a limitless horizon. The challenge that is facing us, to once again borrow John F. Kennedy's term, the new frontier, is the merging of two past solutions, both based solely on dependence. One, a dependence on self, and another, a dependence on others. Recently, we've been engaged in conversations with the IMF about forging a partnership that will enable us to tackle that challenge so that Ghana can continue in its economic evolution. The Ghana that I find myself governing today is not the same Ghana that in 1983 approached the IMF for assistance. We have learned so much from our past mistakes. We're also using the lessons of the past mistakes that have been made by others to guide us, especially in regards to our recent oil discovery. Likewise, the IMF that we're approaching today is an institution that has broadened its vision and adopted a more holistic approach to the assistance that it offers. In more fundamental ways, this has the potential to be an auspicious partnership. One of my favorite quotes by Dr. Kwame Nkrumah is this one, and I quote, "We face neither east nor west, we face forward," quotations closed. Though Dr. Nkrumah spoke those words about Ghana as a newly liberated nation, I believe that they just as accurately describe where Ghana finds herself today. We face neither east nor west, we face forward. Ladies and gentlemen, this is an exciting time for Ghana. We're in the midst of a transformation, a metamorphosis from a lower middle income country into a fully fledged middle income nation. As with all changes, it can at times feel daring and at times feel daunting. Nevertheless, we allow ourselves to succumb to it, to be shaped by it. We allow it to lead us towards our greatest promise, and that is a destination that can never be charted. It can only be discovered through trial and error. It can only be discovered by learning from our past mistakes. I thank you very much for your kind attention.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. We now have time for a set of questions. There are 4 microphones here. One is right here. There's another one there, another one there, and another one there. And now let me just tell you the ground rules here at the Harvard Kennedy School. A good question has several elements. The first is you start by identifying yourself. Second, you keep it short and it has but one concept. And third, it ends with a question mark. And only one per customer. So please, if you could come around the microphones and I'll just go around. Let me start. Mr. President, you can join us. It's this, you can see the person right up here.
Yeah.
Mr. President, I'm Teresa Chiram from Malawi. What you talked about the IMF and your own country, the conditions that they put in place, is a common complaint amongst African leaders, where they complain that the conditions generally hurt the poor in their countries. And there's been talk about the African solution to its own problems. And I was wondering what you think would be Africa's options in terms of finding solutions to its own financial problems or economic problems in general. Secondly, some African countries currently are facing the biggest health crisis with Ebola. And this in the long term is going to be a cost on the economical side as well. And so I was wondering, what is our solution to the Ebola crisis? Even in the long term, it is a disease that, all right, question mark.
No, thank you very much. 2 fantastic questions. And I'll say something about the IMF program. When we implemented the IMF program in 1983 under the PNDC government, after a number of years, it was recognized the effect in terms of poverty that it was creating. There was a new class of poor people falling out of resource security. And so the IMF came with a new program to try and address that. And in Ghana, it was called the Program of Action to Mitigate the Social Cost of Adjustment, PAMSCAD. And so if you go to Ghana and say PAMSCAD, a lot of people will understand what you're talking about. It was to mitigate the new class of poor people that the program was creating. But let me tell you, it's romantic to talk about African solutions. In the real world, it's difficult. Since 2012, when we recognized that we're running a deficit, we have taken all kinds of actions by ourselves to try and mitigate the situation and turn the economy around. The marketplace is unforgiving and is very skeptical. It's been very difficult to get a buy-in from our foreign partners, from our foreign investors, from the international finance institutions. Over the last 3 years, every single credit rating agency has downgraded Ghana. And the economic narrative about our short-term challenges have been exaggerated. Negative stories every day in all the reputable financial papers. And we came up with a homegrown fiscal consolidation policy, fantastic document. I believe in that document. Yet you can't get a buy-in from anybody. And so what do? You need a schoolmaster standing on a stake, supervising you to make sure you do your homework. And so we are looking at this IMF program. We believe that working together with IMF would bring some policy credibility in terms of the economic policy we're implementing. And we recognize that going back into an engagement with the IMF, with the current outlook they have, would be one that is a partnership that helps us not only to consolidate the macroeconomic area, but also creates the kind of institutional reform that will be a basis for sustaining macroeconomic stability going forward. In all our experiences with going into the IMF is we go in with just a fixation on the macroeconomic situation. We turn it around, we eliminate the deficits, interest rates come down, inflation comes down, and then we end up going into a new program. We came out of a program in early 2012, and to say that we're going back into a program means that there must be something that we must do to make sure that when we achieve macroeconomic stability, it is sustainable. And what it means is restructuring the whole basis of our economy, bringing value addition into the exports that we send out. We produce cocoa, and yet much of the products that people consume with cocoa are produced in Switzerland and Belgium and other places. You think that cocoa trees grew in those countries. We should bring some of that processing back to Ghana. We've been a gold exporter, one of the top 10 gold exporters. There's not a single gold refinery in Ghana. The gold is exported in its raw form. It is refined, and as soon as it's refined, its price is several times more than the raw gold. And so we need to have a rethink about the structural transformation of our economy. And I said that in our State of the Nation address, that all of us must start to look at how we can create several more pillars for the Ghanaian economy to stand on. If we continue to stand on the pillars of primary commodity exports, then you can expect that your economic fortunes will fluctuate. Anytime global commodity markets are affected and there's a dip in cocoa prices, there's a dip in gold prices, you can expect that the economy will suffer. And so there's a lot of re-engineering that we need to do, and I'm sure that we can do that together as a nation. We will go through the program. I'm upbeat about the IMF program, because a lot of things the IMF is going to ask us to do, we have started doing ourselves, because we believe that it is healthy for our economy. And so we're looking to do that partnership. Let me just quickly touch on Ebola. It's been predicted that economic growth rates in the affected countries would reduce by some 3.6% this year. And it's sad because these are countries that were emerging from conflict, and we're doing everything possible to invest resources in building their public health systems, in building their educational systems, and so on and so forth. And so to be affected by this outbreak at this time is something that is worrying. But certainly it will worry the whole of the sub-region, even though Ghana does not have a single case of Ebola. The fact that we belong to the same sub-region, drives that same perception that if anybody stepped on your shores, they will come down with Ebola or something. And so there are major visits. We're expecting investor groups. There are major events that were supposed to take place in Ghana this year. We have received notices of postponement. But happily, with the advocacy we've been doing, the international response has kicked in. And I believe that with the kind of response we're seeing, including the UN's announcement of a mission for emergency response in Ebola, I'm a born optimist. I believe that in the next 9 to 12 months, if the treatment centers are set up, if the isolation centers are set up, if we get the personnel, it's not just the logistics alone. These countries have a shortage of health workers. They don't have enough nurses, they don't have enough doctors. And so we also need volunteers to go in there and help to stem the outbreak. And so everything being equal, if all these things come together properly, then hopefully within 9 to 12 months, we should be able to turn this around and send Ebola back to wherever it came from. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
That did end in a question mark. There were, however, 2 questions. So for the future, 1, go ahead.
My name is Julian Duran, and I'm a first-year student here at Harvard College. And this is regarding more the deficit, Ghana's deficit, and inflation. Now, my understanding is that these 2 conditions are sometimes necessary evils in order to stimulate your economy and propel it forward. But there's also the issue of concerning yourself with fiscal responsibility. So my question to you is, what do you value more? Fiscal responsibility, in other words, taming inflation, keeping the deficit down, keeping the deficit lower? Or is your focus to stimulate Ghana's economy and keep it in that 7% GDP raise every year?
You can stimulate the economy by running a deficit if you have a robust and strong economy. And so you do that deliberately to stimulate it and get it to grow. If you have a fragile economy like we have in West Africa, deficit financing, of course, some deficit financing is important, but a greater sense of fiscal responsibility is very necessary, and that's what we're going to do. You must get the balance right, and I guess that the finance minister and his team, are working on that.
Right over here.
Mr. President, thank you. My name is Amandla Ombaka from Kenya. My question is about legacies of generations. You spoke about the Nkurumas and the Kenyattas of this world who gave us independence. You talked about the Mobutus and the Idi Amins of this world who took us to the lost decade. When I look at this current generation of leaders, I think of them as trying to anticipate growth. And when I think about my generation, I think about regional integration. So what is your perspective on the legacy of leadership that your generation is trying to leave behind? And what are your hopes for the legacy that young Ghanaians and young Africans will take forward?
Tough question. We respect and appreciate what our predecessor leaders left us. And even in the worst of cases, in the period of the lost decades and what we went through with military dictatorships, we appreciate the lessons we learned from there. That is what gives us the opportunity to be better leaders, having looked at the past and arrived at this point. I happen to be one of a new crop. I was born after independence. Many of our leaders were born before Ghana was born, were born in Gold Coast, and there's a generation that was born after independence. I think that we have a greater responsibility because today we have more instruments and tools to be able to make life better for us. The world has moved forward. There are new inventions, there's ICT, there are all kinds of tools that we can use to make life better for our people. And we must aggressively pursue that. One of my frustrations is the slowness of technology uptake in the various sectors of the Ghanaian economy. And if I can push that, it's a legacy that I would very willingly leave. We're doing quite a lot of things to try to improve transparency, to try to improve efficiency in the public service. We are implementing a new public financial management system called the Gift Miss, which would improve transparency in terms of our public financial management. We're applying new technology to governance, and we need to push this aggressively. There's a kickback from some generations that are not, comfortable. They say BBC, born before computers. There's a kickback from some generations that are not very comfortable with technology and ICT. There's also a kickback from some people who do not like the transparency associated with the new technology, that comes in place. And so we must provide the leadership to push these reforms through and make sure that they result in a better life for our people.
Good, thank you. Right up here.
Yes, good evening, Mr. President. I'm David Rose, a first-year Master in Public Policy here at the Kennedy School of Government. And my question to you is what is your opinion of the risks and opportunities involved in accepting sources of funding and development assistance from non-IMF sources, such as China?
Very loaded question. Ghana has very good diplomatic relations with China, and as a leader, I have to choose my words carefully. We have a good relation with China, and we have been doing a lot of work, in a bilateral partnership. China's emergence as a world power has been positive for Africa in the sense of the fact that the instability in the global commodity market has been made much better. We're getting a higher value for the primary commodities that we export than when China was not a player in that market. And so in that sense, for countries like Ghana, even though I talked about some instability, it was worse before China emerged as a global player. And so in that sense, some of the economic development we're seeing from better prices from commodities, is attributable to China's emergence as a power and its appetite, for absorbing global commodities. China has also been strong in Africa because of its demand for commodities. It has invested a lot in Africa in terms of infrastructural development. And so some of the resources that we need to invest in economic infrastructure has been forthcoming from China. In Ghana, there are several examples. Our third hydroelectric power dam, which is contributing 400 megawatts of power into our energy generation, was built using Chinese funding. There are several other infrastructure projects that we have carried out with Chinese funding. We're about to commission a new gas processing plant to process our offshore gas to feed our thermal generation. That gas processing plant, $800 million, was funded by China. And so we do have a good relationship with China, but I think like every other nation, if you accept financing from anywhere, you should do it with your eyes open, and you must negotiate properly and ensure that the downside risks are as minimal as possible. And we're doing that in Ghana.
Thank you. Right up here.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I'm Dugati Tanji from Cameroon. Mr. President, I listened to you keenly when you went back into a bit of the African history, which we learned when we were in school. And I live in Africa. I'm actually taking the mid-career Master in Public Administration program here at Harvard at the moment. I live and work in Yaoundé. If you tell me at 4 p.m. in Yaoundé that I have a meeting in Paris the next morning at 9 a.m., I can confirm I would attend the meeting. But someone asked me to meet him in Ghana, gave me 4 days notice, and I was unable to confirm. And I actually took 3 days trying to find out how to get to Ghana from Yaoundé, and it was a problem for me. The reason being that, one, I didn't know how to get a flight to Ghana, a straight flight. Secondly, I needed a visa to go to Ghana, me, from Cameroon. Vice versa, a Ghanaian needs visa to get to Cameroon. Now, the question I would like to ask, I listened to you, you said nothing about the AU. And I thought the AU would be a source of hope for those of us who are interested in living and working in Africa. Now, how do you feel sitting in a meeting with people who've been in office for 30, 40 years? You came to power through democratic elections. Some of them are not living. And the second question?
Sorry. Sorry, somebody else got to beat you to that.
No, thank you very much. And I'll
It's a good first question, so let's start
I'll answer
there.
that very quickly. First, with your allusion to air travel and the interconnections between our countries, I must tell you it's improved dramatically. I mean, in past times, if you wanted to travel to some other part of Africa, you had to fly out of Africa and fly back into Africa. That situation has improved radically with increased investment in aviation. I've experienced the frustration you talked about before. I was selected to participate in a UN DP program in Yaoundé, and I had to travel from Accra to your country, to Yaoundé, to attend that program. I had to take a flight from Accra to Togo, and then take Cameroon Airlines from Togo to Douala, and then wait at the airport for 7 hours to catch a flight from Douala to Yaoundé. So I know what it's like. I mean, it took me, by the time I got to Yaoundé, I was all dizzy and from traveling and waiting. So I understand what you mean. But I mean, there's more investment coming in aviation, and I find now that there are hubs where you can interconnect fairly easier than you did in the past. But yes, that is the tragedy of Africa, integration. If we absorbed you into ECOWAS, you are in the Central African Regional Economic Group, then you travel to Ghana visa-free. Because in West Africa, we have a 90-day visa-free entry, for all the 15 member states, and you can travel between our countries without a visa. What we've done is using the regional economic blocks as building blocks for eventual African unity. And I believe that with some of the things we're doing within the regional economic blocks, if we take down the barriers between the blocks, we'll find that we're better able to plug in, a more integrated Africa than we've had. There's no doubt about it. We are better off together than as separate countries. Trade amongst ourselves is only 11% of total trade, which is shamefully low. I mean, if you want to take products from one country to another, I mean, it's like, I mean, even cassava dough or, yam or something from one country to another, it's like you're smuggling drugs or something. I mean, every policeman wants to look inside your luggage and charge a fee for allowing you to cut across. It's a shame, and us leaders need to continue to work on it. I'm chairman of ECOWAS, and I've taken it as one of my major projects to ensure that we move the integration project forward. Under my chairmanship, we held a meeting in Dakar, and we agreed a common external tariff, and that is a first step towards harmonizing the tariffs within our sub-region and creating a free trade area. In some parts of Africa, they've moved a step further. In SADC, they are closer to a free trade than we are, but all of us must speed up this work in our different sub-economic regional zones. And once we've done that, we can plug in and become one integrated whole.
Thank you. Right here.
Thank you, Mr. President, for coming to Harvard today.
Thank you.
My name is Joseph Luna, and I'm a PhD candidate at the Department of Government, and I've just returned from spending 10 months in your country conducting research for my degree.
Okay.
Mr. President, as I traveled around the various districts of your country, I was honored to meet many local opinion leaders and public officials to learn about their experiences with local government. However, I frequently heard complaints from these opinion leaders concerning the quality of public services being delivered by the district assemblies. In particular, many of them felt unable to criticize assemblies because they were not experts, or they feared being labeled as political. Mr. President, what would you say to these opinion leaders, and what steps is your administration taking to ensure that communities can engage in open and critical dialogue with the local government system?
Thank you. Fantastic question. Ghana has advanced in terms of decentralization, and indeed, it's one of the things that contributes to Ghana's political stability. We have the district assemblies, like you indicated, and there are 216 of them. And our constitution cedes 8% of total national revenue directly to the assemblies. And they decide on their own what they want to use the money for. And so they use it to build schools, they can build clinics, they can build all kinds of things. Now, we chose the assembly system because we believe it must bring about accountability. And so there's a district chief executive who's the political head, and there are the assembly members who are elected. Now, the assembly members are supposed to represent different electoral areas. And so in drawing up the budget for the district, it must be approved by the assembly. And the assembly has a presiding member. And so it's like a mini parliament in the district. We have been educating our people to understand that the power rests with them and that the district chief executive is accountable. We must take the next major step to put power right in the hands of the people, and that is to make the position of district chief executive electable. And so if these people know that it's the people who at the end of the term will decide whether you continue in office or not, then it will shift power into the hands of the people. And so it's one of the reforms we are considering in the Constitution, to make the position of district chief executive electable. But there are other legislative challenges with regards to transferring fiscal responsibility to the district assemblies. There's a kickback from the MDA level because, of course, nobody wants to relinquish power. But we're taking those steps. We're bringing especially the health sector and the education sector into the whole decentralization mix.
Thank you. Right over here.
Hi, thank you for being here with us, Mr. President. My name's Carolina, and I am a sophomore at the college. And my question relates to energy security concerns, and specifically how your country deals with other nations to tackle them. Can you speak more about how your administration has dealt with the growing energy demands and specifically the challenges it faces with other nations? And off the top of my head, I can say Nigeria and Cote d'Ivoire when trying to fix these.
Okay, I get you. Yes, one of the binding constraints to Africa's development is lack of adequate, affordable power. And so even if you wanted to make an investment in any of our West African countries, you have to consider that you might not have adequate power at an affordable price. And so Ghana, after a constraints analysis, came out with the decision that the next compact we're going to do with America should be directed at the energy sector. Because what we're doing is trying to position ourselves as the power hub for the whole of West Africa. As a result of the fact that we belong to the West African power pool, our transmission grids are already interconnected. And so if we produce more power than we need, it is possible for us to evacuate that power to our neighbors to satisfy any energy deficit that they have. And so that's the vision we have going forward. And we're doing this using a mix of sources, including renewable energy. We have a Renewable Energy Act that enjoins us to ensure that at least 10% of our energy mix comes from renewable sources. And so we've signed MOUs for almost 400 megawatts of solar energy, which we're going to phase into our national grid. We're looking at biomass, we're looking at wind energy and all kinds of energy. But Ghana's own demand for power is growing, and we've been going through some kind of energy crisis because we have this West African gas pipeline that is supposed to bring cheap Nigerian gas to the three countries, Benin, Togo, Ghana, and Ghana. Unfortunately, I'm sure Harvard should do a study in that pipeline. I'm sure it's the worst investment that has ever been made in the history of mankind. I mean, the gas is not reliable. On any day, I can't plan my energy generation based on the West African gas pipeline. We just came from 1 week of no gas because oil and gas workers in Nigeria went on strike for 7 days, and so no gas in the pipeline. So we shut down 300 megawatts of power. That's what we face. And so what Ghana is trying to do to assure energy security is to bring onshore our own gas, which we have, and we hope to commission our gas processing plant by the end of this year, and that will produce 150 million standard cubic feet of gas, enough to generate about 600 megawatts of power. And so it means that all the thermal plants in the western region, in a place where we call Abuaze, would use gas instead of relying on either the West African gas pipeline or importing light crude oil from Nigeria. And so that's the situation with Ghana.
Thank you.
We have time for just 2 more questions, right here.
My name's Nick. I'm a first year at the college. Given your educational background and your emphasis on in the field of communications, I was wondering if you can speak to the importance of Ghana's perception within the international community. It generated a lot of buzz here, during the World Cup, for example, when the players were not paid, and that you helped step in and broker a solution there, and that maybe reflected poorly on Ghana versus Ghana taking a forward role as a leader in the Ebola crisis. So I was wondering if you can speak to, from an economic standpoint or even from a social standpoint, how important it is for Ghana to project a positive image in the international community.
Thank you very much. Those are the tiny fishes I talked about that we have to continue to deal with in present leadership. I think that one of the things that make for effective leadership is to learn from the mistakes that you make. And I think that what happened in Brazil, was a mistake that should never happen again. It affected the morale of our players, and no wonder we were kicked out of that tournament. We are conducting a postmortem. There's currently a commission of inquiry into all the events that took place in Brazil, and based on the report of that commission, we will take corrective measures to ensure that something like that never happens again. But congratulations to the United States. We were third time unlucky, and you defeated us in the game we played together.
Last question right here.
Mr. President, thank you so much for coming here. My name is Stefan Kensa. I'm originally from Cameroon. And my question is about rebranding Africa. And so I feel a little bit frustrated to have an African leader come here at Harvard and remind us of the leaders that we're trying to forget about, and talking about them in the tone that you use. And I wonder then, since some of those type of leaders are still in power, when you meet them at African Forum, since you have the opportunity, what do you tell them? I mean,
no,
because
thank you. Thank you very much. As a communications person, I'll tell you, rebranding is not sweeping your past under the carpet. It's learning from your past, and that's exactly, what I was doing here. I mean, America has its past. I mean, there are dark things in the past of America. Europe has its past. There are dark things. I studied history, and I know what happened in the Middle Ages in Europe. Women were thrown into the lake if they were suspected to be witches, and if they managed to swim and come out, they say, yeah, she's a real witch. And then they put her to the stake and put fire on her. If she drowned, they say, oh, God bless her soul, she was not a witch, but you're dead anyway. I mean, so... So every part of this world has, a part of its history is not proud about, but you don't sweep it under the carpet. You must learn from it. And so when I narrate these things, it is that we must make sure as young Africans that we don't go to that past again. And that's why I recounted that history. But rebranding, yes, we should rebrand. Let's put our positive foot out. And I'm happy to note that the international media attitude towards Africa is changing. Before, Africa got mentioned in the media only when there was a conflict or there was a famine or an outbreak of Ebola. Today you can watch the international news media, and it's not only negative stories, because of course in the media negative stories sell, but also you see an attempt to showcase Africa in positive stories that all of us see on CNN, African Voices, and all that. So I think that the situation is shifting, and we should take advantage of the new interest that is being generated across the world in Africa.
So let me take advantage of my position to ask you one last question. By the way, I should say it wasn't just Europe where they drowned some alleged witches. It was very close to here, about the time Harvard was founded, actually, in Salem. So we have a lot of people in this audience that would love to be a leader, would love to make a difference and to have a chance to make their country better. Do you have any words of advice for them as they think about how to make a difference and move forward?
That's a very difficult question. I'll just say one of the things that distinguishes leaders is to try to think outside the box about limitless possibilities. And it's when you're able to do that, that you're able to craft a vision of where you want to go. But you cannot get there by yourself. You need a buy-in, a strong buy-in from the constituencies that you deal with. And that's what I've come to realize. Often leaders are one step ahead because they see the picture, they see a vision, and they expect that everybody is seeing the same picture that they see, and so you should be right behind them and moving towards that vision. In real life, it doesn't happen like that. It can be frustrating, it can be slow, it can be, so difficult, to get people to see the same picture that you see. And so getting a buy-in, thinking outside the box, seeing a vision, but getting a buy-in from the constituencies that you need in order that you realize, the objectives of your leadership is the most crucial, is the most critical. I know many people would have wanted to ask questions. You can send your questions to my email address, mahama2000@yahoo.com. And it's mahama2000@yahoo.com, as simple as that. You can send the questions, and I promise you, I check my email, and I would respond to your questions. Thank you.
Really fun. Mr. President, you clearly are a new kind of leader. We have had many heads of state here speak in the more than 10 years that I've been dean. Not one before you has given out their email address. So we admire your industry and your vision, and we will do our best to be behind you there. Thank you very much. Welcome, and have a wonderful weekend.
Thank you very much.